Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and today is a special holiday episode with my special guest, the aptly named Holly. Now, Holly is an expert in fermented foods, and more specifically, in lacto-fermented sauerkraut. In fact, she's written a whole book about sauerkraut, but she's also very knowledgeable about all things fermented. And you know that in Life After Sugar, I talk a lot about the importance of gut health, as much about not eating sugar, because sugar is one of the worst things for your gut health, as adding in fermented foods and drinks like yogurt, kefir, kombucha, and fermented veggies like sauerkraut and kimchi that we're going to be talking about in this episode. I realize that fermented foods are not super well known in North America or Western society, but different cultures have been consuming fermented foods or cultured foods for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So in our so-called advanced society, we're kind of a couple of thousand years late to the party here. And our consumption of highly processed foods, most of them containing some kind of sugar or flour or refined seed oils, well, all that plays havoc with our gut health. So what better way to have a happy holiday season than to make your gut happy? And that's what this episode is all about. Just before I start my chat with Holly, I'd like to invite you over to my website, aftersugarclub.com, where you can click on the tab What to Eat and watch the 3 short videos there, including one that's all about fermented foods and gut health. In fact, if you want to learn to make your own fermented foods and drinks like kombucha and sauerkraut and yogurt, come and join us in the After Sugar Club. That's aftersugarclub.com and click on the green button, Join the Club. You'll see that learning to make your own fermented foods and drinks is much less intimidating when you have a good teacher that simplifies and demystifies it all. And you can also download my simple guide to getting more energy with less sugar. Go to aftersugarclub.com and click on Simple Guide. And come on over to say hi on my Facebook page, Life After Sugar, and on my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar, where I post pictures of some of the fermented foods and drinks that I make, as well as other things that I eat and do. And, well, generally, you'll find inspiration there that it's perfectly possible to lead a fun and active life even if you don't eat sugar. And I'm recording this podcast in December 2021, and this is the month that I will be starting my Life After Sugar YouTube channel, so look out for that. All right, here's my holiday chat with Holly. So today I'm talking with Holly, who is an expert in gut health and fermented foods that I came across, and I just wanted her to be part of this special holiday edition of the Life After Sugar podcast. So welcome, Holly. And can you tell me how you got into this whole world of fermented foods?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thanks so much for having me. I'm anxious to share with your audience just some simple little things that can kind of radically change their eating lifestyle. So fermented foods, I've always been into healthy eating and can remember even like the first health book I bought way back in my early 20s. It was a book, Pritikin Healing, which was like a whole no-fat book, but which I'm way far away from now. But I've always been into searching for the diet that makes me feel healthy and energetic and feels right to me. And I came across a book, Nourishing Traditions. It was given as a gift to me back about 25 years ago. I looked at it and was a little overwhelmed by all the preparation in there, put it aside, and then read some article that kind of forced me to pull the book back out. And in there, it's put together by Sally Fallon, and it's based upon some research by Weston A. Price. And this was a dentist back in the 30s and 40s who went around the world looking for healthy people that did not have any dental caries or did not have crooked teeth or missing teeth, and then looked at their diets. And so this is based upon the healthy traditional societies that Weston A. Price found, what they ate and how they prepared the foods. And one common thread through it all was the use of fermented foods. And that's what I said, I'm going to try this, and went to the store and bought a jar of Bubby's sauerkraut. That was the popular brand back in, 20 years ago. There was not a lot of fermented foods on the counters in the grocery stores, nor any books with which to learn how to make these fermented foods. So I tried Bubby's, and then that started getting too expensive for the family. If you're going through a jar a week, you start spending a lot of money. And then switched over to learning how to make my own with the Nourishing Traditions book. Her recipes include the use of whey as a bacteria starter. And we've learned a lot since then, or have brought back into common knowledge things that our great ancestors did. So over the years, I've developed different recipes, and that's what got me into putting together a whole website on how to make sauerkraut and book and course. But it was the search for radiant health and coming across traditional societies that had that good health and what they ate.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. And did it help you have better health?
I've always had good health, so it was more that it helped me, energy-wise. I noticed a difference, and even sometimes I would reach for that jar in the mid-afternoon when you'd have kind of that energy slump, and just take a couple bites, and it was just like this burst of energy and radiance coming from the jar. And then I didn't notice like a lot of digestive changes until I traveled without my sauerkraut and without my fermented foods. We did a car trip and just didn't bring anything along. We're gone for about 2 weeks. And I noticed just digestion slowing way down, and got back to my fermented foods, and everything was right back on track again. So I kind of noticed it by not having them in my diet.
Ah, wow. Isn't that amazing? So it's not like we have to be, scraped off the floor because we feel so bad to start eating fermented foods. It's an extra to make ourselves even more healthy.
Exactly. And then I find about 2 years ago, I wanted to post a recipe on how to make kimchi on the website. And it was something totally new to me. I had back, in my 20s, met a Peace Corps volunteer who had volunteered in Korea. And all he could talk about was how nasty it was trying to get used to eating kimchi. And so I always stayed away from it because it was like that fearful little imprint of this stuff is nasty. But, I decided it was time to make it, and included fish sauce. And that was like, I'm not a fish person. Why am I putting fish sauce in this? But I realized I love kimchi now. I love the flavors in it. And I realized through researching it that kimchi includes both fish sauce and other ingredients that impart like umami, a really rich flavor to the foods. And I realized then that fermented foods, they create their own MSG in essence, and a healthy natural MSG that is healthy for our bodies. And that happens through the fermentation process. And that's why like chefs include tomato sauce or tomato paste and Parmesan cheese and a lot of these ingredients in their dishes for the umami that makes flavors pop. And so now when I'm eating a meal, if I don't have fermented foods on the plate, the meal tastes somewhat flat, and I feel I have to go pull that jar out that I was too lazy to pull out of my jar and put onto the plate. And all of a sudden the flavors pop. So that's been like my latest discovery with fermented foods, is how they really open up the flavors in a meal. And it's like the secret to becoming a 5-star chef. All you have to do is put something rich in glutamate, which is fermented foods, and the meals just taste so much better.
Totally amazing, isn't it? Because, we tend to be we just know the processed form of MSG and to keep away from it. But nobody told us that actually the glutamate can be produced by fermentation and be good for you. There's a huge difference between the industrially created MSG and the natural glutamate.
Exactly. And people think that the fermented foods they're eating is only for the probiotics. And it's like the more and more they research this and delve into what's going on in that jar and what's produced, it's like this discovery of mine, the glutamates and the flavor changing aspect of that. So yeah, there's so many benefits.
Fantastic. I mean, and I teach in the Life After Sugar program and in the After Sugar Club for people to really concentrate and be aware of that all the other flavors that exist, not just the sweet flavors, because we are used to being our brain being jacked up on sweet taste. And we kind of find that all the other flavors are bland or don't give us that dopamine hit that we're looking for. And I teach, first of all, to lower that need for a dopamine hit in the first place, but also to really appreciate all the other tastes, including the umami taste that not a lot of people know about.
Right, exactly. A little hidden treasure of those fermented foods.
Totally.
And as you consume more of those fermented foods and your gut health improves, then the bacteria that live in your gut start requesting other food. If you are feeding them sugar, then the bacteria that love sugar, they're going to populate your gut and they're going to keep begging for more and more sugar. As you gradually shift away from the sugar and the fermented foods and healing your gut, all of a sudden you don't have to fight the sugar cravings because your body stops asking for it. It's really amazing.
It's amazing. And having lived it myself and knowing lots of people who have lived it themselves, it's not just amazing. It's like, why didn't anyone tell us this? It's a discovery. And so when we talk about fermented foods, I just want to dial it back a little bit because not everybody knows what we're talking about when we say fermented foods. Can you give us like the Cliff's Notes about that?
So if like my focus is sauerkraut, and so that is a fermented vegetable. People may be familiar with pickles. Those are fermented foods if you buy the traditional pickles, but the industrial food processing companies, you have to work hard to find the real pickles. But fermented vegetables, what happens is during the fermentation process, we're packing these vegetables, we're chopping, slicing, dicing, whatever. We're packing these vegetables into a jar. And these vegetables come with bacteria. Lactobacillus is a common one, and they're living on the bacteria, on the vegetables, especially vegetables growing close to the ground like cabbage, and even the ones in the ground like the carrots or the pickles. They live on those vegetables. They're there when you carry them into your kitchen. And once you have those sitting on your kitchen counter, there's two sets of bacteria. We can call them the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. And all of a sudden rot's trying to happen. The bad bacteria trying to eat those and break them down, decompose them. But if we chop them up and process them and pack them into a jar and make sure that they're under the brine where the bacteria like to live and work, then what happens is you are fermenting those vegetables. We add salt. Salt is necessary because it's the bacteria like a salty environment. Without air is why we're packing things under the brine. But the bacteria in there are eating sugars. They're eating the sugars in the cabbage, in the carrots, in the pickles, whatever. They eat those sugars and they produce lactic acid. Lactic acid is a preservative. It's a flavor component. It gives the tang to your fermented vegetables. And it's what preserves them and drops the pH way down below that you can't grow any nasty bacteria in there, or E. coli, et cetera. They can't grow in that packed jar of vegetables. And so they ferment anywhere from a week to 3, 4, 6, 8 weeks, depending on what you're making. And then you have fermented vegetables with less sugar than you started with. So some people, especially in the paleo community, are afraid to eat sauerkraut that have beets in them because they're afraid of the sugar content. Well, the bacteria have eaten the sugars in there. There's still a bit of sweetness in there. So you can kind of still play with those, satisfying the sweet taste buds, but not the overpowering sweetness at all. So those become fermented foods. And through that transformation process, we've lowered the sugar content, we've produced the lactic acid, and now they're preserved and ready and waiting in your refrigerator to consume over the next year.
Amazing.
And they're full of probiotics, so full of beneficial bacteria, because those original bacteria, it can be a very small quantity that were on the vegetables to start with. They have rapidly multiplied. There's trillions of the beneficial bacteria in just one little forkful of sauerkraut. So if you're hesitant to eat it because it's a new flavor for you, even eating just one strand of that sauerkraut is going to provide beneficial to healing your health, producing nice.
We underestimate how many good bacteria are actually in fermented foods and drinks, because we are sold for these probiotic pills that they've got all these billions of good bacteria and probiotics. And for us, that we know a little bit more about fermented probiotic foods and drinks, and we're not fazed by those billions, because we know our fermented foods have trillions.
Exactly. There you go.
So I imagine, or at least from my experience, not a lot of people in, I suppose, Western society know much about fermented foods and drinks. And it's certainly not part of our daily dietary habits, and even less so for the holiday season, Christmas, or whatever holidays that we celebrate around this time. So can you help us to add just one or two fermented foods or drinks to our holiday dishes this year?
Okay, excellent. I know there's a couple we can work with to try to keep things really simple for people that are new to this and want to throw together a ferment they can try. Maybe it's their first time to even try fermented foods. One nice one to start with, it's very simple. You can add it to your appetizer tray. So if you have guests come over unexpectedly or planned, you pull out your jar of fermented carrot sticks and they're right there. Children love them. You get a nice creamy dip. And that's a nice way to introduce the fermented foods to somebody that may not be familiar with them. They're not a huge switch from eating a plain raw carrot. They have the tang to them. They have a little bit different texture, but to make, and I can put together for your guests a little link to my website with these recipes handy for them.
Yes, please.
Yeah. And so fermented carrot sticks, all you're doing is peeling the carrots, slicing them in, not slicing them, or cutting them into nice dipping pieces. So quartering them lengthwise, packing them into a jar and pouring a salty brine over them. Then those sit on your countertop for 1 to 2 weeks. And during that process, you'll see little bubbles forming because the bacteria, as they eat the sugars in those carrots, they're producing that lactic acid. They're also producing a lot of gas to make your jar anaerobic, to push the excess oxygen out of the jar. So you actually see some action in that jar. You get to watch fermentation happen. And then you can try those and dip those into any of your dips that you would normally have on an appetizer tray when you have company over for your family.
So fermented carrots, that's one idea. And basically cut them up into like sticks and let them ferment. How long do you let them ferment in the brine?
Anywhere from like 5 to 10 days works well. You can, there's a lot of things that can wreak havoc, or not wreak havoc, but play a factor on that. But, temperature in your room, et cetera. But I find for a nice beginning ferment, just 5 to 10 days works well for the fermented carrot sticks.
Smashing. And so does the taste change? Do they taste like carrots still?
It still tastes like carrots, but you've lost the crispiness because it softens a little bit during the process, not to a soft, flexible carrot, but the texture will change slightly. And then you'll have that tang. That lactic acid is sour. A lot of people aren't used to sour flavors. So it takes a little bit getting used to. And that's why it's nice with the carrots. You can dip them into a nice creamy dip. And that will kind of mask the tanginess to get you used to it. But that tanginess also opens up all your flavor taste buds, and the flavor profile really pops. So it's nice, kind of a nice combination to work with.
Ah, that's brilliant. And what about something that's a little bit more traditional?
Yes, cranberry relish. It is one of my favorites, and it's a fairly new ferment. When I first started fermenting, I just did sauerkraut. And then as more and more people published books and explored the modern world, the modern day take on fermentation, a lot of neat recipes came out. And so cranberry relish is one of my favorites, and it's made with fresh cranberries. You can buy fresh frozen cranberries, but you're taking cranberries, orange juice, pecans, dried cranberries, and you're running them through your food processor and changing the consistency to a nice relish. And that ferments for just a week. And it is just wonderful alongside any of your traditional holiday meals. I also put it on my appetizer tray, and that becomes with crackers and a nice white creamy cheese. And you can layer that with your cheese and your cranberry relish, and that's a great appetizer. And then if I don't run out of it and have it throughout the year, I like to keep it actually handy throughout the year, my cranberry relish, because it becomes my dessert for a meal. I will put my plate together, and then on the side, put a little dollop of cranberry relish, and that waits till I'm done with my meal. And then I eat that, and it's like, oh my goodness, I've kind of satisfied my craving for anything sweet, but yet there is sugar in the recipe, but it's fermented away. You do need sugar, or else you can't feed the bacteria. So you can't make a sugar-free recipe, but the bacteria will eat the sugar as they go through the process of fermentation. But that I find satisfies any cravings for something sweet, and yet is nourishing my gut at the same time. And I'm getting that umami pop and that glutamate, and just you come away from the meal just so like happy.
Oh, sounds wonderful. I'm going to make it, definitely. And so that's what some people sort of don't understand about the sugar being used in the fermentation process. For myself, it's my kombucha. In this example, it's the cranberry relish. And so it's the good bacteria that eat up the sugar, not the human.
Exactly. And, I haven't measured the levels of sugar in there. So there is sugar at the end, but it's greatly reduced because we have to feed the bacteria. You have to feed the bacteria nice, fresh vegetables and ingredients, and you have to feed them sugar. A lot of times people will end up with a batch of sauerkraut that just tastes bland. It doesn't have the tang in it. And usually the culprit is the cabbage they started with wasn't sweet enough. So there wasn't enough sugar in there to feed that bacteria to help the fermentation process and lactic acid develop. A lot of kimchi recipes call for sugar, and that's again to feed those bacteria and really develop some nice flavor in the finished product.
Yes, and that's right. The bacteria need sugar. We don't, they do.
Exactly.
That's lovely. And how can people use these recipes to make Christmas gifts?
Oh, exactly. It's a great way to share, especially when you're excited and you learn something new, a new way of processing foods, and you love it. You love the flavors of it. And my teaching recipe on how to make sauerkraut, we use as a weight to hold everything below the brine, just these little jars. You can use like a 125 milliliter, 4-ounce jar. It's a fairly small jar, or you can use the next size up, and you just say you make a batch of sauerkraut and you pack it into 6 or 8 little jars after it's done fermenting. And people love that as a gift. It introduces your newfound passion to them, some new flavors. And it's just a great way to help other people through the holidays with some good gut health, because it does make a difference how just a little bit of beneficial bacteria in your gut microbiome can radically change your health. One of my readers wrote to me sitting at a kidney dialysis machine with a picture of my book and stuff and saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. You totally transformed my life. I found your book. I learned to make sauerkraut, and any gut issues I had of running to the bathroom every minute stopped the next day after I started eating your sauerkraut. It was like a radical transformation for him. And it's just amazing how responsive your gut can be to good food.
Yeah, totally. Amazing. And what's the title of your book?
Fermentation Made Easy, Mouth-Watering Sauerkraut.
Lovely, lovely. And that also would make a good holiday gift.
Exactly. And I am the very first batch of sauerkraut I made, I seasoned with dill. I think Bubby's had dill in it, so it's kind of duplicating that recipe. And then some local farmers had me over to demonstrate a batch of sauerkraut. And I said, what do you have other than cabbage? And they had carrots and garlic. So I threw that in and I went, oh my goodness, this totally tastes better than just a simple plain sauerkraut. So that totally transformed how I look at sauerkraut recipes. And I do have a plain sauerkraut recipe in the book, but there's a whole wide range. My husband's favorite is firecracker sauerkraut that has sliced jalapenos in it, and oregano. And then like one of my favorite is Hawaiian sauerkraut that has pineapple and lime zest and juice and cilantro in it. The world is your oyster. You can do anything in the way of flavors. And that's kind of you'll notice that flipping through my book is just all the beautiful flavors that you can develop in different batches of sauerkraut.
Wonderful. Sounds fantastic. And just to finish up, what is the main benefit, would you say, of making your own fermented foods and drinks rather than buying them at the store?
Oh, excellent question. I have always a quote on my presentations I do when teaching people how to make sauerkraut, and it's about empowerment. When you get in the kitchen and you make something with your own hands and you connect with that bacteria, it just opens up a whole wide range of possibilities. You're taking care of yourself, you're saving money, and then you're connecting with this microbial world. And all of a sudden you start looking out around the world in a different way. You start thinking about what you're feeding yourself. You're thinking about where these bacteria live, and you're thinking about connecting with local farmers because they have the best produce. Success in fermentation really begins with the best produce, which is locally grown produce, either in your backyard or with local farmers. The longer it's been since it's been picked or how far away it's shipped, your beneficial bacteria decrease. So I just love people to be able to start taking care of their own health. And that's really what got me into it, was how can I take better care of my own health? And through fermentation, it's just wonderful. And it's not like a ton of work. It's amazing how quickly you can throw together a batch of sauerkraut in 20, 30 minutes once you get good at it, and you have that for a month to eat from. So it's taking charge of your health through that empowerment of this newfound skill that our great ancestors knew how to do automatically.
Yeah, and I want to demystify this whole world of fermentation that people think is weird, that I thought was weird.
Exactly. And you just look at when I first started fermenting, there was no Amazon, there was no YouTube. I had one fermentation book by Sandor Katz and one book by Sally Fallon, Nourishing Traditions. That was it to learn from. And my only choices for keeping things below the brine were like marbles, stones, etc. So it's amazing just in the last 20 years how we've made home fermentation so much easier. So it'll be interesting to see what the future holds. But when they look at the trends from year to year, actually fermentation for the last 10 years has come up on one of the top trends in food industry, food fermentation.
Yeah. Let's hope we're part of that trend. I mean,
yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, and there is no better holiday gift, in my opinion, or at any time of the year, that of empowering yourself to look after your own health and well-being.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Holly.
Oh, it's so great talking to a kindred spirit like Holly about all things fermented. And Holly will be back in at least one more episode of the Life After Sugar podcast in 2022, because I'm pretty sure we'll never run out of things to say about fermented foods and drinks. Now, I realize that over the holiday period, many of us will probably be eating things that are exceptions to our everyday eating habits. And I'm the first to say that making every day a special occasion is at the heart of Life After Sugar. So personally, the holidays are no exception, because I like to have fun every single day of the year. And that includes looking after your gut health, because a diet that's high in processed foods and added sugars can really affect the beneficial bacteria in your gut. And this imbalance or dysbiosis can cause increased cravings for sugar, which
further damage the gut, and an unhealthy amount of refined sugar, especially high fructose corn syrup, in the vast majority of sugary industrial products can lead to inflammation in the body. So an exception from time to time is not the problem, but an everyday diet high in sugar can increase chronic inflammation by contributing to the formation of harmful biochemical compounds that spike inflammation and make negative changes to gut bacteria that can also boost inflammation. And added refined sugars in our diets have also been shown to elevate bad cholesterol, which is also linked to increased inflammation. And there's also a relationship between sleep and gut health. In fact, our gut microbiome is a vast community of microscopic organisms living in our intestines, and it's very closely connected to our nervous system and produces neurotransmitters and hormones, including the sleep hormone melatonin. Scientists are just beginning to understand how gut microbiota affects our health and contributes to aging, disease, our sleep, and our mood. But research on sugar's effects on the gut microbiome is surprisingly limited. But what research there is comes to the same conclusion. The standard Western diet, one that's high in processed sugars and refined seed oils, causes an unhealthy imbalance in the composition of our gut microbiota and leads to all kinds of health issues, including chronic inflammation, digestive issues, and cravings. So what better way to have a happy holiday season and to start the new year than by learning how to make your own fermented foods and drinks? They're way cheaper than the store-bought ones, and you get full control not only on the ingredients, but on the whole preparation process and the length of fermentation. So if you want to give yourself the gift of good gut health and improve your digestive health, your mood, your energy, and your overall health, then come join us in the After Sugar Club. Go to aftersugarclub.com and click on Join the Club. Here's wishing you all the fun and joy of a happy holiday season and a happy gut. And if you're enjoying this podcast, then scroll down and rate it and leave a review to let me know how this episode and the Life After Sugar podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that it arrives magically in your podcast player every Sunday. Thank you for listening. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.